Hi, I'm Dave from boyinaband.com, and on this tutorial I'll be making the beat for the classic trance song Alice Deejay, Better Off Alone. This is a commission tutorial for Tim, so nice one Tim. And also, if you want to find out how to commission a tutorial yourself, just head over to my website boyinaband.com. This tutorial will involve automation and plenty of other useful stuff. Okay, let's begin. Okay, I've got the drums here as the starting point. Now I've just simply put an instance of redrum with a couple of samples, this kick drum, and what will come in soon, this clap here, and I've run them through an equalizer just to accentuate the bassiness of the kick sample and the click of the clap sample. I've just used the param 1 and 2 there to do that. Then next up we'll go into the hi-hats. I'll just move the track back, start looping it from about 9 till 13. Okay, now we've got the hi-hats, and you can see here I've done much the same. In an instance of redrum, I've got the hi-hat riff being played, and I've used an equalizer to cut off the high end because the hi-hats aren't very piercing in this track, but I've used param 2 to accentuate around the 3 kilohertz area, which I feel was like the strongest point of that hi-hat sample and where the sound is most prominent. Then I've run it through a maximizer just to bring up the level of the hi-hats and limit it with the 4 milliseconds look ahead so it doesn't go too loud, and then finally through a stereo imager, which I've used to widen the sound and just make it more, it fills out the sound a bit better. But remember, you've got to use panning in order to be able to make the most of the stereo imager, otherwise it won't do anything. Okay, and then that's finally run through this mixer, and I've used the auxiliary knob after adding a reverb unit to add a little bit of reverb to the effect so it sits in the mix a bit better. And also I've got a crash cymbal in this, which I have, if you press tab to look at the back, I've routed the channel 10, which is the crash channel, through into the mixer separately so it avoids all these equalizers and maximizers and things, so it's a bit of a separate entity, and added a bit more reverb because I think the crash needed it to sit in the mix even more so than the hi-hats. Okay, so next up we've got the bass, this bass effect, which I have made with an instance of Thor run through a maximizer to beef up the level. And in Thor here we've just got 2 sawtooth waves an octave apart and a sine wave, or also an analog oscillator used to make it, and that the sawtooth waves give it the kind of texture of the sound, and I've mixed it so the higher of the 2 octaves is more prominent, and the sine wave gives it the bassiness of the actual bass sound. Then I've used the filter to knock off the high end so it's more bassy, and that's how I've made the bass effect. The maximizer just brings up the level so it hits a bit harder. Okay, next up we've got our lead effect. Here we are, and I've made that with an instance of Maelstrom, just 1 oscillator, just a sawtooth wave, run through a filter to knock off any of the high end because that's a bit too piercing, so taking the filter down a bit helps there. Then I've run that through a stereo imager to make it bigger. Again, use the spread knob to make it wider, otherwise the stereo imager will have no effect. I've run that through a digital delay line to give it that epic feel, and then that's gone through again into a mixer with a bit of reverb. Turn up the aux knob there once the reverb's been added to the mixer, and finally I've run this through a filter so when the automation kicks in, I'll just go to that point now. Here it is. The automation filters it, And that's been done by, if you click on the combinator, which I keep everything in a combinator, keeps things tidy, and then click the Show Programmer button, then click Filter, which is that filter there, drop down arrow here, Frequency, that assigns rotary 1 to the frequency knob of this filter. So it allows you to automate it through the combinator's track in the sequencer window, which keeps things tidy. So to add the track, you just have to right click on the lead track and click Parameter Automation on the side, and that brings up this window here. And then I've just clicked, you just check rotary 1 and then click OK, and then that brings up the track. And then to add the actual automation, you just click and drag, just as if you were going to add some notes. And then when you're in there, click the pencil tool, and you can place parameter automation data like that. And that's how you automate it, which is pretty cool. Then you can get those epic build-ups. Okay, so next up, we've got our... Oh, let's have a see. We've got our snare. No trance build-up would be complete without the stereotypical snare build-up. Like this one we've got here. We've got, again, I've automated the master level of the mixer I've run the snare through. Snare is just in a redrum instance, just a sample there, run through a stereo imager to widen the sound, and then into the mixer so I can control the level a bit more easily. And then there we are, rotary 1 has the master level control, and much the same as I've done before, I've controlled the automation there in the sequencer window. Okay. Next up, I've got the choir, which is simply the Lush Choir preset, because it's an awesome preset. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The pad I've made with an instance of Thor, just 2 multi-oscillators, fairly low down on the octave, a sawtooth wave and a square wave, and I've just cut off some of the high end there with a low pass filter, and that's it. Nice big pad already there. Next up, we've got this kind of filtered sync bass, which I've made using 2 synthesizers, an instance of Thor, which I've got analog oscillator sawtooth wave, a PPG5 high harmony wavetable, which had a nice kind of overtone, which I really liked, so that's why I put that in. It sounds like the effect. And then just to add the bass end again, I've got the sine wave there on the bottom, and I'm using the modulation bus routing to give it that effect that you can hear on top of that. And in Maelstrom, I've got this PWM, which is pulse width modulation wavetable for the harmonic overtone, and a sawtooth for the kind of the power of the synth. And again, I've used modulation B to affect the filter, which is running through here, to automatically give that same effect as I'm doing in the modulation bus routing here. And then that's run through a stereo imager, just to widen the sound even more, because it goes on. There's a solo section in the song with just that bass, so it needs to be very, very big. And then finally, we have this lead super saw, which comes in here. And I made this effect in Thor. Yeah, there. Just 3 multi-oscillators, an octave apart, each one, so 3 octave spread, and cut off a bit of the high end there. And that's how I've made that effect. And once again, I've used the combinator to route rotary 1 to the filter 1 frequency here in Thor, so I could automate it during one of the big build-ups of the song near the end. Well, I hope that helps, and thanks for watching and listening. Go rave now. If you found this tutorial useful, help me out by rating this video or posting a comment so other people can find it. And don't forget to check out my website, boyinaband.com.
Have a nice day.